our nervous system is not completely solid all the way through. Just like our neural tube, a tube has a hollow inside, right? Same with our nervous system. Now, it's not completely hollow, but I mean, it's not like super hollow like this figure right here, but it is hollow. So CSF in the brain that gets infected could infect the whole spinal cord and vice versa. Yes, that is correct. So the CSF that circulates within the brain is also the CSF that circulates with the spinal cord. And let's bring up the central canal. So this central canal is not just a pocket of air, it actually has that central cerebral spinal fluid. So it's actually a small channel that conducts and transports cerebral spinal fluid. So it's not just in the meningeal layer, it's also on the inside of the spinal cord as well. And you also find cerebral spinal fluid within the brain itself. And these are your brain ventricles. So again, remember that our CNS starts out as a tube. This is the inside of the tube. So the ventricles, these are pockets of fluids and space within our brain. So our brain isn't completely neurons all the way through, not completely solid. You do have these spaces. And can I set up my drawing activity? This is my way of drawing the ventricles of the brain. Magnum opus, don't make fun of my art. I know I can't draw. So this is how you draw the brain ventricles. So what I do is I draw a little skewer. I like to think of it kind of like a, have you ever seen like those kind of like barbecue sticks, but they have a little point at the end? So I like to do that. The barbecue stick here is kind of representing the overall central, like where you see your CSF. So this is where you have all the hollow inside of your central nervous system. Now what you're going to do is put at the end of these sticks, you're going to put two shrimps. So why two shrimps? Well, one goes on each prong over here. So there's actually so these are your lateral ventricles. So there are two of them, left and right. Now, this always comes up every year, like, okay, which one is the first ventricle, which one is the second ventricle of the brain? I haven't found like a definitive answer. Don't worry about which is first and second. Notice that they are the first and second, but they're rarely called that. They're mostly typically called the lateral ventricles. So these all have CSF, these lateral ventricles. And then what you're going to add to this little skewer over here, you're going to add chicken nugget. So this chicken nugget right here is your third ventricle. So this is your third ventricle. And at the very end of your shish kebab over here, you're going to add a little bell pepper slice. And this is your fourth ventricle. So the ventricles, like, they have some structure called the choroid plexus that makes cerebral spinal fluid. But the main point here is that these all contain fluid, and this is where you have pockets of fluid in your brain. These are ventricles, they're supposed to have cerebral spinal fluid, and these are where you make cerebral spinal fluid in your central nervous system. So yeah, this is showing you the innermost structures. So again, these are not solid structures, these are spaces that contain fluid. Okay, so then with our brain ventricles, again, we have our lateral ventricles, we have a third ventricle, and our fourth ventricle. This is a cool scan. So what's actually showing is that circulation of the fluid on the CSF inside the brain. So again, the ventricles are not solid structures, they contain fluid, they produce a central cerebral spinal fluid that circulates throughout the brain. And the cool thing is that you can also see this movement not only within the ventricles, you can also see it surrounding the outside of the brain, the stem, and the spinal cord, and also flowing on the outer surface of the brain. So again, it's not just the ventricles, you also have it in the subarachnoid space surrounding the brain and also in the spinal cord. And it's kind of tough to see because the central canal is kind of thin and small, but you would also have circulation on the inside of the spinal cord. So This is a cool image because it shows you that cerebrospinal fluid circulates on the outside of your central nervous system and also on the inside of your central nervous system in both the brain and the spinal cord. So again, this is cerebrospinal fluid. It's a fluid that bathes the inside and the outside of your central nervous system. And what are some general purposes of it? Well, it helps you with buoyancy. Again, your central nervous system is contained within bone and all these meninges, but it's not just there without it, just like in pockets of air. This helps to kind of cushion and helps to float it as well. So again, your body has weight and your brain definitely has weight as well. So the cool thing is that it allows for circulation. That's why we saw that movement in that previous GIF and image. And this is why we see that. So you're not only producing cerebrospinal fluid, but you're also circulating it throughout your whole central nervous system. And this is how you make cerebrospinal fluid. What cerebrospinal fluid is, this is all your blood that runs through your circulatory system. And the fluid part of your blood is called plasma. So in order to become cerebrospinal fluid, your plasma has to filter through these endothelial cells, these astrocytes, these neurons, and ependymal cells, which are the last stop before it finally becomes CNS. So what happens is that this is filtered through this blood-brain barrier. And I like to think of it this way. It's kind of like a water filter. So you have blood, it's filtering through all these different layers of cells, and eventually becomes this interstitial fluid, then through neurons, and then through ependymal cells, and then it finally becomes cerebrospinal fluid. So this is why your CSF should be sterile. It undergoes multiple rounds of filtration, and then it becomes something that's similar to blood plasma, but it filters out a lot of the big particles, and say there is something like a errant bacteria or virus in your blood, it should not make it through all these layers of cells and these ways of transporting substances across these cells. So I like to think of it as a very expensive, very thorough water filter. It's filtering this fluid through multiple layers of cells, and then you should have an ultra pure product at the end. That's your cerebrospinal fluid.